It's a fascinating and challenging time to be in marketing. The technology landscape is rapidly growing, but maybe not as fast as the growing concerns about consumer privacy. So, how do companies continue their marketing journey into the future? In this episode, I speak to JC Granger, CEO of Infinity Marketing Group, about the future of marketing and how to consider balancing that with consumer trust and privacy.
And so what happens is we want to have ads and we want things that are relevant to us because people love buying stuff. We just hate being sold. And really, you're being sold when it's something you don't want, and you're buying something when it's something you do.
JC Granger has 20 years in digital marketing experience. He launched his agency in 2011 and finds particular joy in empowering tech companies to grow while discovering exponential digital sales success. JC is a passionate and skilled marketer who takes pride in Infinity Marketing Group's ability to deliver a comprehensive ROI for its clients. So, ready to dive into marketing and the future? Let's discuss. I'm Rebecca Scott, and this is Humans Now and Then. JC Granger, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So we had an interesting conversation a few weeks back about marketing and privacy and the trajectory we're on. So a lot of folks are starting to realize more and more that their data is being used. A lot of people may not understand exactly where or how, but they are making the connection between the website they just visited a few minutes ago and the ads that are starting to pop up on Facebook or wherever they are visiting right now. So I wonder what you think, based on your marketing experience, what you're seeing around the concerns with your clients around balancing convenience with privacy and marketing.
Well, it's a different answer for clients versus consumers because, you ask a client, well, they want all the data. Because, obviously the more information they have, the better they can target, market, and, segment their lists and make sure they're providing, marketing and their products and services to the right demographic at the right time. But if you ask 1,000 people, what they want with their data, they'd say they want it all private, and which makes sense. When my clients aren't clients, they're also consumers, right? The problem is, you can't have both, right? So for example, I remember when like Hulu came out originally, right? Because they were competing with Netflix and they said, well, ours is free. We have a free version, but you just have to watch some ads. And I remember in the initial parts, the ads were wildly unrelated to me, right? There'd be ads for, luxury sports cars or, diapers, and I didn't, at the time when I was, watching, I was like, well, my kid doesn't need diapers and I'm not buying a sports car. And so eventually they started adding this feature on there where they started asking basically, is this ad relevant to you? So they kind of self-governed in the middle and in there. But that was because they didn't have a way at the time to know their consumers who were watching. They didn't have cross-data pollination where they could know that the person watching was also person X over here online. And so what happens is we want to have ads and we want things that are relevant to us because people love buying stuff. We just hate being sold. And really, you're being sold when it's something you don't want, and you're buying something when it's something you do. So when it comes to data, as a marketer, we love having as much as we can, but we have to balance that with the consumers wanting to protect it because unfortunately you have bad actors out there that are harvesting the data, stealing it online, using it to get people's identities and credit card information and all these things that are really disruptive to someone's life. It's that paradox question of, where's that middle ground? And the one part of marketing that I have found that a lot of consumers don't really understand when it comes to data is they see the headline of data companies that have all this information about you and they're giving it to marketing companies. And although that's technically in a way true, it's not true in the way that they're viewing it. So there's this thing called hashing, where essentially it's basically encrypted data. So if I go to a data company and I say, I need the data of all these software CEOs of companies that are this size in this location that have this much revenue, right? Well, I can get that data, but I can't see it, right? So I can get that data and I can import it into like a Google Ads campaign or Facebook campaign. And it's what's called hashed, which basically means that I can use the data. So I know that everyone that I'm sending this ad to is the right person, but I can't like open it up and see first name, last name, email, phone number, and stuff like that. So that's actually what's going on more and more these days. The companies found a middle ground where they were able to share data without revealing the details, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I think that's a great opportunity to find the balance, like you said, the best of both worlds. We are still providing some level of privacy to consumers or your potential customers out there, but still getting a lot of great insights that not only help your business, but also help provide relevant marketing to potential clients that are out in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, again, privacy is important, and also as marketers, it's been frustrating a little bit over the last few years because browsers now, it started off at like, less than 1%. And now 2, 3 years later, you have 20 to 30% of browsers automatically blocking data. Now, again, from the consumer side of my brain, I'm like, sweet, awesome. But from the marketing side of my brain, I'm like, well, that's terrible because what happens for our clients and just for any business who's trying to understand what's going on when they're marketing, the problem is that they can't track. And if they can't track, then they don't know what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And so that percentage of data that's not being shared is growing every day. And although that might sound really great to privacy advocates, it also does hurt the economics. I mean, marketing is what America runs on. It's the gas in the engine. If we can't market properly, we can't sell properly. If we don't sell, people don't buy. If people don't buy, then we're not the capitalist nation that we've built ourselves on. So it all really does connect. So the harder it gets to track with marketing, the economy itself actually suffers. People go to work, and if the job that they go to, if that company can't sell their services or products as well, they can't afford as many employees. So someone's getting laid off. So there is a ripple effect. And so it's interesting to try to figure out where that middle ground is between wanting to protect your data but understanding that you are part of an entire machine that is what creates the country and the economy that you live in.
Yeah, and a lot of that really starts to build into the relationships that companies have with their consumers or potential consumers and the level of trust they're able to build with those consumers. Now, that trust is probably going to depend on their experience across the web landscape beyond just the specific companies that might be engaging with them through their websites or through social media and so forth. But there's an interesting aspect of trust here that I wonder if that is harder to gain to some extent in relation to the privacy or the data that folks may or may not want to give, and how that really starts to factor into the relationship question that companies have with their consumers or potential consumers in their market.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting that you say that because I was just talking to a few clients this week about the relationship base. So, marketing and advertising ever since probably the 60s and 70s has started going more towards technology and pricing, right? About branding, right? Getting your brand out there, inbound marketing, things like that. It was this slow evolution that, obviously really peaked hard here in the mid 2000s. What happened here with Corona is it kind of traumatized the business market. So what ended up happening is, you look back at these old movies of, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s, where, this handshake and a smile, that was a deal. That's how you bought a car. That's how you bought a house. That's how you bought pretty much anything, door-to-door salesman kind of thing. It was all relationship-based, one-to-one. And if you trusted the person and the product seemed rational and valid for you, then, you buy it, right? But then over the decades, what ended up happening was that things became, more automated, cheaper, faster. Advertising became, on TV and marketing and inbound, and branding and all this stuff started really contributing. And so now you had people buying things based on brand awareness of it. Have I heard of it before from someone else? Do they have commercials, which must mean they must be big, which means they must be quality. That's just kind of the psychology that sets in. And so that was all very true until about a year ago or less than a year ago. And what's happened now is because so many companies went under, that kind of trauma has set in. So what you have now is all these business owners who the relationships that they're going to do, if they're going to hire a vendor for services or products or whatnot, they want to know they're going to be around in 6 months. And that's not a guarantee in their head. It doesn't matter when the quote unquote goes away. I was telling you in the pre-show, an analogy that I'd used was, my great grandparents, good luck telling them that their cash shouldn't be in their mattress, right? Because they remember when the banks ran out of money. And it doesn't matter that the FDIC came in and insured everything one day. You can't convince someone that has that kind of trauma set in. They're going to just stay with their actions. And COVID has really set in a trauma with businesses where they're really only willing now to work with people that they trust and have those relationships with because they're very scared about their budget because they don't know if something else is going to happen. And they want to make sure that whoever they're working with is solid. So that's been that whole shift in marketing now recently has been relationship based versus branding based.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting trajectory as we think about where we're headed next, what's going to happen in the future. A lot of folks, as we talked about privacy and data, and we see a lot of regulations starting to pop up across the world to help control not even just the use of data, but also the consent that people have in relation to the use of their data. And different countries and different areas of the world might have different opinions on this, but it's really interesting to see these bits and pieces starting to come together and start to tell a story of what the future might look like for marketing. So, what are some of the things you see or some of the trends you see for the future of marketing?
Well, for one, the more outbound relationship-based one-to-one contacts are going exponential now. So email marketing, for example, LinkedIn outreach if you're B2B, text message marketing if you're B2C, getting those high-touch, quick response, direct one-to-one relationship style marketing, that's what's really ramping up right now. And again, what I'm going to say doesn't apply to Fortune 500s, right? They have enough money to spend where, they can do all the things. Okay. But if you're a small business and let's say you were, doing a long-term SEO, right? Search engine optimization, and you were, putting out content and really just kind of hoping to draw people toward you. It's not that that won't work. It's just that the amount of money it'll take, the amount of time it'll take to work is now an upside down equation versus that direct outreach. So if you're B2B, getting on LinkedIn and connecting with people in that very laser targeted market that you want to connect with and having real conversations with them. Email marketing, a big thing as well, segmenting those lists and making sure that you're doing more personal style outreach, less flashy graphic based emails and more one-to-one, like you're emailing your grandma kind of emails. You know what I mean? Text message marketing for B2C, reaching out and actually texting out to your consumers, the ones that of course have opted in for it. So that's really what's moving forward. It's really complicated too. There's a lot more to it than even we can explain on the show. There's a book I'm writing right now called Crisis Marketing: How to Survive and Thrive in Pandemics, Bubble Bursts, and Corporate Scandals. There's a million books out there and material about how to do marketing, but there's essentially almost nothing out there about how to market when a black swan type of event happens. And then we and you had talked about my podcast coming out, The Future of BizTech. So I interview software CEOs and I ask them about like what's coming in the future as well. And I think that's really fascinating because technology and software specifically has had to adapt and really fill in a lot of gaps for all the things that went away and were not usable during this pandemic, right? I mean, my internet is slow all the time now because internet companies are struggling to keep up with all the people working from home, So you've got, Zoom went through the roof in their stock for obvious reasons,
Right.
So those kind of things, that's what's happening and pushing forward now with all the changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And companies have had to really think about how to adjust course, towards this new world that we're living in. It's really fascinating when you think about where all of that could head from a marketing perspective. And you hear a lot of folks talking about different types of concerns about what marketing might look like given the amount of data that's being collected. And there is definitely a perceived loss in privacy, even when you think about the dynamic of smart cities in the future and how we're going to have a lot of information collected about us and targeted to us as we navigate in the world, much different ways than we had in the past. But I wonder if that's something that you think about, or if there's anything that specifically concerns you about the future.
Okay, so I might be taking kind of a Stephen Hawking approach here on this one, but AI kind of terrifies me a little bit in good and bad ways. On one hand, you have what's called IoT, Internet of Things, right? And really, that's just a fancy way of saying everything talking to each other. Now, that's not AI. That's just communication between platforms and things. So, for example, you get enough driverless cars on the road, there's a tipping point where those driverless cars can start talking to each other so they won't hit each other, for example. So they start bouncing signals off each other and communicating so that they can help with the flow of traffic, right? So if a non-self-driving car got in an accident, all the other self-driving cars would automatically know how to reroute, right? So that's kind of Internet of Things, so to speak, things working together and talking to themselves. Now that's pretty cool. There's going to be, that would be hard to have a downside to. The only downside there is when you start having systems communicate with each other, it also leaves you vulnerable where if someone can break into one system, they have access to all of them, right? So that could be an issue right there, where if you start connecting too many things, then if there's a bad actor out there who wants to, sabotage something or, get in there, they have access to more because each thing leads to the next, right? It's a daisy chain, basically. And I would hope, obviously, that, that's being taken into consideration and then that there's, firewalls and roadblocks between those. But that's one thing that kind of concerns me when it comes to that. But I also see the upside. I'm not a fear-based person. I see the upside and the hope-based. And I think that the more that things talk to each other, not only the better, more efficient things get, between travel, the markets, I mean, you name it, there's everything can benefit from that as well, which is really cool. I love AI. I do. I love machine learning, and I like things that can think on their own. But there is that caveat where it's like at some point, if you let it get out of control, it wouldn't be something that's a gradual problem. We'd wake up today and everything's fine, and then we wake up tomorrow and nothing is. You know what I mean? Because the speed at which an AI gone wrong can go wrong is so beyond our comprehension, of how we think of things progressing, that it would just it would be like getting broadsided by a Mack truck, right? There wouldn't be an in between, So, my fear is you put AI into, airlines or, financial systems, something like that. And the thing is, as humans, we're going to do it. We're going to go for it. There's no way around this. We're going to do it because we're explorers. We're, by heart, and by instinct, we're always going to push the envelope, and everyone is kind of doing it on their own. But, if it gets to a point where somebody gets too good at AI and then releases it into a financial market because they want to make more money, but then they might end up crashing the market by accident. You know what I mean? And that's trillions of dollars in people's savings. I mean, you thought the housing crash was bad. That would be nothing. That'd be a blip compared to if a rogue AI got into the stock market, that was that smart. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I share a lot of those same concerns. There's so many different, vulnerabilities, like you mentioned. Having everything connected can lead to a lot of cool opportunities, like you mentioned. There's a lot of neat things that we can do for the environment, in healthcare, in safety for people. I mean, all those things are really beneficial. But, the thing that freaks me out is like neural mesh.
Yeah.
You think about from like the Internet of Things perspective.
Well, honestly, though, it's funny you say that. The neural mesh, basically plugging your brain into a computer hybrid,
Right.
that might actually be the one thing that could save us from an AI thing. Because the people who have fears are like, well, what if the robots take over? It's like, actually, technically, it's a rational fear in a way, right? There's some people who take it a little too far, but technically speaking, it's a rational fear.
Right.
The only way to really make it not an us versus them is a hybrid model. And we already do this. Remember, we already have mechanical and electronic, arms and stuff for amputees from wars. We already have these things happening. The next step in the evolution is tapping into our brains, right? And I think the one thing that could actually keep a balance is if it's not an us versus the AI, it's us with AI. And I think that's really the solution there, is that if we can make ourselves a hybrid and smarter with AI, well, then us as humans can still control it with our own, values and morals and things like that. Whereas an AI would be amoral and would just do things so logically that, we might be the problem. And now the logical solution is for us to not be around anymore, right? You start going in a Terminator 2 space, at that point, right? We laugh about it, but the one of the smartest men in the whole planet ever lived, that was his biggest fear, Stephen Hawking, and that, I trust his fears. So I think it's that. I think neural mesh actually makes me a little excited for a balance to where there's a cohabitation to it and not a two sides of the coin.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it really brings to the forefront the importance of ethics in technology.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of our concerns are really around the ethical use of those technologies and the ethical build of those technologies. And also, at what point is it become risky to push the boundaries even further than we are today? Like you said, if we keep trying to push the boundaries the way we have over the last several years, at what point is it time to stop?
Well, we already have. And here's the thing. That's the thing. I mean, again, remember the housing crash. People look at the housing crash because they say Wall Street got out of hand and they started doing junk bonds with housing, right? And that's fine. But you know what enabled that? It was technology that made that possible. That wasn't something you could run on spreadsheets. Okay. That wasn't something you can run on paper. The foundation of the ability to basically take somebody's mortgage and then split it up 1,000 ways and put it out into these and package into these other packages, that was software that made that possible. There's no way to track that without that. So I think that's the issue that it becomes, is that someone makes a platform and a foundation to do one thing. And then someone over here goes, hey, you know what I could do with that? And that's really where the issue is. It's not someone going, I want to make this software that's going to crash the housing market, or I want to make this software that's going to, hurt people. It's they want to make a software that does one thing and then someone else figures out how to exploit it because they don't have ethics, or maybe they thought that it wouldn't be a problem. Maybe it's ignorance too. I think between technology and ignorance, we're just as much as at risk as unethical behavior too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that kind of goes back to the potential for unintended consequences. And why it's really important that when folks are developing new technologies that are disruptive, that they think about it from a critical lens as well, not even just about the benefit it can bring, but also what harm could be potentially done in the creation of this new disruptive technology. I think that question, especially for, so there's going to be some things that it probably doesn't matter a whole lot, anything, small gadgets for our home and that kind of thing. But when we think about the Internet of Things in particular, that question becomes much more profound when things are connecting to other things in ways that could lead to unintended consequences or outcomes.
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree.
Yeah, interesting space. I keep telling my daughter she needs to consider going into, some kind of digital ethics or technology ethics field in the future. There'll be lots of opportunities, I think, in the near future in that field.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It'll be needed, but the question is, will it be ignored?
Gosh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Let's hope not. Let's hope not. But hey,
For all of our sake.
right. Where we continue down this Terminator path. let's let's go a different direction. Let's think about things that we're optimistic about in the future. So tell me a few things you're optimistic about in the future.
Optimistic. I mean, I honestly think that what's going to be great is I think healthcare is going to really, really benefit here in the future because regardless of what side of the political spectrum you fall on in regards to, universal healthcare or, all private or whatnot, I think that what's pushing really harder now is healthcare technology. And the fact is that's good for everybody because technology can really help make things cheaper. And one thing that everyone can agree on is healthcare is expensive in America. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter. Everyone agrees that healthcare is expensive. And we wish it wasn't, but we disagree on how to get to that part. And the one thing that I've seen happening a lot lately is the new advances, not only in software for healthcare, but in the hardware. I mean, look at 5G coming out too. So 5G is everyone's looking at it from a consumer point of view. We're like, oh, look, my phone is going to be really fast. And yes, it will. But 5G is it's not some like gradual evolution from 4G. I mean, it's exponential. It's not even close. I forget like what kind of exponential it is. I remember it was something stupid like 100 times faster or something than 4G, right? LTE, it makes it look like a snail and you're running a rabbit next to it. You know what I mean? And why that's important is because at that speed, you can actually have I was watching this special where they were showing the ability for a surgeon remotely. It could be in India, could be in Spain. And the speeds were so fast that they could tap into one of those mechanical surgery machines, which typically they do on site, right? For those little kind of nano type of surgeries that human hands are too big to actually get in there and do those really specialized surgeries. Like if you're trying to extract cancer or doing bypasses and things like that, where they really need to get in there. And you could have a doctor somewhere around the world that is hooked into their own machine and they can literally do a surgery on someone here in America or vice versa. Right. So when you start looking at things like that, that's really cool because, that doctor who is amazing might charge half the price of a doctor here to do it. Now, of course, you probably still have to pay the facility fee and whatnot, but that's one example of where the speed of technology coming out, 5G and healthcare software, things like that could really help streamline and save costs. Now, are there other repercussions to that? Sure. But when things advance in the healthcare world, that's the one thing where everyone can literally benefit. And so that's what I'm really optimistic for, because especially when you have a pandemic going on, it really brings healthcare to the forefront and technology has been really, really helping with that. So I'm really hopeful for that in the next 3 to 4 years for sure.
Oh, yeah. I think healthcare is a tremendous opportunity for improvement and access to care, cost of care, all of these things that are critically important for a well society, things that are challenges that we have today. And hopefully we get to this place where healthcare is not politicized. Because to your point, I think everyone can agree that healthcare is expensive and that's a problem, but the solutions become difficult to find. But if we are able to find creative ways to improve access to care and affordability to care, and also quality of care, which is another really amazing thing that's happening as a byproduct of COVID to some extent, is that healthcare systems have had to become more agile. They've had to become more clean. And those impacts will be positive for all of us when we seek healthcare in the future post-pandemic.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, hey, I wonder if you have any advice that you would provide to any companies out there. Because I know as they're navigating into this future, we talked a little bit about what the future might hold in relation to marketing. We talked a little bit about the importance of relationships as we consider our marketing strategies and so forth. If you had a leader today that's listening out there and wants one step to get started towards a better path toward their marketing future, what would you recommend for them to do?
I'd say to switch to a more of an engagement situation, rather than branding, right? So branding is just, that's billboards and commercials and display advertising and content, things like that. Again, those are all great, but if you have a limited budget, that engagement type of thinking is where you're going to really be successful. So if you're, again, B2B, it's those direct outreaches on LinkedIn, on email and text messaging if you're B2C. But specifically as a quick little tip, see, a lot of people, when they think engagement, they're looking at their stats on social media of like people replying, or commenting and stuff. And that is true. But again, social media is more of a promotional style, more branding than it is direct engagement. So my point is that, for example, let's say that you are already sending out email newsletters, right? Let's say you have a really cool graphic email newsletter, goes out once a month about your products or services, and you're really proud of it. I would suggest split testing that with a text-based email that asks a question. So maybe 1 to 2 sentences. Personalize it, says, hey, John, we're coming out with this new service that does this. I'd love your feedback on this particular part. What do you think about XYZ? Question mark, right? And what you're going for there, see, instead of just putting the graphics and saying, here's a link to the new website and here's a video that shows the product and service, blah, 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 that's promotional. That's shoving it down people's throats. If people start switching more to an engagement thought process where they start reaching out directly and asking these questions, you can do it still automated. You can send 10,000 at once, right? You can have 10,000 questions out there, and then hopefully you get a certain percentage of people that reply back. But if you switch to a more of an engagement foundation, what's going to happen is you're going to build that relationship. It's going to shorten your sales cycle, and it's going to increase your conversion rate as well. Because again, that kind of trauma is set in, and now no one really trusts that whatever company that they're working with or buying from is solid, because they don't know, because we don't know a lot of things right now. Things are really unstable. And even when they get stable, again, that trauma is set in. So my biggest advice is switch to a more of an engagement style personality when you're marketing, and come back a little bit off of the branding and promotional stuff, because I think you'll see a big difference.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I want to also give you an opportunity to give a teaser about your podcast, because, of course, I'm really intrigued about the types of guests you're getting and stuff. I know you gave a little bit of a teaser before, but what are a few things that we can look forward to in your new podcast?
Oh, yeah. So it's called The Future of BizTech, and with a BIZTECH. So it'll be on iTunes and Spotify and all the places, all the things. Essentially, I interview medium to large size B2B software CEOs and CMOs. And really what I'm going for is a part of the podcast is kind of asking, how they built it, right? But the majority of it is, what's coming down the pipeline. So one of our guests that we have that we'll be leading off with is the CEO of a software called Trainual. And Trainual was something that I found a couple years ago that blew my mind. It was basically the software that allows a company to upload and automate the process of their employee onboarding. And that was something that was really hard for me before, because I was having to kind of go off of a checklist before and making sure I was doing it right. Whereas I could upload all of this, and then I could just invite my new employee. They would log in and they would be able to go through each step and check it off as they were done. And so I didn't even have to talk to the person after they hired them until they were done. So this way, when I did talk to them, they were totally caught up. They had gone through everything. They knew our processes, they knew our policies, they knew our ethics and our values. They knew all those things. They were already logged into stuff. And day one, I could talk to them and they knew exactly what I was talking about. So it was such an incredible software, and I loved it. So I got to interview that CEO. But yeah, I mean, that's an example though. There's another CEO I got to interview talking about the ethics part here. They made a software that tags on top of a Google Ads campaign, for example, so that your ads don't run on websites that don't go with your ethics and morals. So for example, you don't want probably your services or your products running on a site that talks about white supremacy, right? So they figured out how to give websites a toxicity score so that your ads won't be next to those, because that could look bad for your brand. I thought that was really cool, right? So those are the types of people that I'm interviewing. It's not just like basic software, it's cool stuff that not only I think can really help small to medium-sized businesses be efficient, but also that where they're going in the future is going to really change the industries that they're in.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear that and hear some of your first few episodes, because that sounds really intriguing to me. So folks, go check out JC's new podcast that's coming out, Future of BizTech. You've got a book coming out. When's your book due out?
Oh boy. So I just did a co-author book with a bunch of guys, and that was called Mission Matters. But the solo book, the crisis marketing one, that's probably about a year out between, getting done writing it, getting it edited, published, all that stuff. So it's probably about a year out, but it'll always still be relevant because people remember what's going on right now. And I think people are going to be switching their mindset from fear of what they're going through now to trying to be prepared for if it happens again. So I think the timing will still be really good, but the crisis marketing book will probably be about late 2021.
Awesome. Well, something for us to look forward to.
Yeah.
So keep an eye out for his upcoming book in about a year. Otherwise, you can find his podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, and find his podcast, probably the same place you find mine. So JC Granger, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. JC takes pride in his company and his vision of the future, but also in the value of outbound relationship-based marketing. While the evolution of technology is fascinating, what may be more interesting and maybe more important is to consider how our relationships could evolve along with those changes. The reality is that as people become more aware of the data being collected about them, they may also become more wary, which makes sense. As JC mentions, marketers themselves are consumers and want to consider their own privacy as well. This should not be seen as a limiting factor. Instead, it should be seen as a hotbed for innovation, with high potential for the application of empathy by design. As marketing evolves and considers ways to personalize content, they also have a tremendous opportunity to find new ways to maintain and even grow trust, and bolster the relationships they build with their consumers and beyond. And if relationships are really the key, it opens the door to so many possibilities to bolster trust, while creating relevant experiences that help consumers locate what they need when they need it. So it's a great time to learn more about the future of marketing. For all of us, it's also the perfect time for us to reframe how we think about innovation in the future, in terms of bolstering relationships and maintaining trust. And while you're at it, go on. Go help shape the future. To learn more about JC and his company, Infinity Marketing Group, go to infinitymgroup.com. That's infinitymgroup.com. Before you leave, make sure to subscribe to Humans Now and Then so you don't miss the amazing episodes coming soon. I'm Rebecca Scott, and this has been Humans Now and Then, hosted and produced by Rebecca Scott. Episode notes can be found at humansnowandthen.com. Thank you for listening.